My name is Dr. George Nield, and I'm talking to you today from Potomac Falls in Northern Virginia. And I grew up in Northern Virginia, went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado, and then had the opportunity to serve in the Air Force. I worked for NASA on the Space Shuttle program, and then the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation. And then I also had a chance to fly on the fourth human space flight of Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket a few years ago. So happy to talk to you all today.
Dr. Neil, how did some of those early experiences in the Air Force and at NASA kind of shape your leadership style at the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation?
So let me back up even earlier than that. I was interested in space and aviation from the time when I was a young child, and that was a very exciting time for the world in terms of space. And I was just fascinated by what was going on with the space monkeys and the early Mercury astronauts. I would cut out articles from the newspaper and clip pictures from Life magazine and had myself a little scrapbook and just followed that very closely.
Okay.
Loved math and science growing up, and when I was ready to head to college, I looked at all the alternatives and thought that because of my love for aviation and space and the fact that I like a challenge and also appreciate the opportunity to serve our country, that the Air Force Academy would be a good fit for me. So
Yeah.
that's where I went to school.
Okay.
Later on in the Air Force, they sent me to Stanford University for a master's and
Wow.
later a PhD in aeronautics and astronautics. And also had the opportunity to go through the Air Force Test Pilot School as a flight test engineer out at Edwards Air Force Base, which was very exciting. And so all those things just reinforced my love for aviation and space. And so when NASA started developing the shuttle, I wanted to get down there as soon as I could and be involved in the program, whether it was an astronaut or in some other capacity, and eventually got assigned down there to the Johnson Space Center. At that time, the Air Force was planning to have its own shuttle, basically, that it would launch out of Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, and its own control center in Colorado Springs, which would be similar to the Johnson Space Center. And so they were sending a bunch of Air Force folks down to Houston to work with NASA and learn how to do that job. And that was very exciting for me. But then after the Challenger accident, the Air Force sort of lost interest in human spaceflight, but I was having a great time. We loved our house and our community, the schools, the church, all those kinds of things, as well as the job. And so I ended up deciding to get out of the Air Force at that point and work for NASA directly for a number of years. So throughout all those uh, opportunities, uh, it occurred to me that it's really important to have a good technical background, but it's also more than being just good technically. If you want to be a good leader and a good manager, you need to be able to communicate well and articulate a vision to motivate and support the people that are working for you.
Yeah.
During that time in Houston as a office manager of the flight integration office as part of the shuttle program, I recognized that I got a lot of satisfaction from leading a team of people working on a challenging task, which was preparing shuttle missions for flight. And that made me appreciate that it takes more than just good technical know-how if you want to be successful in that type of an opportunity.
Okay. So what surprised you the most about how fast the commercial spaceflight industry matured over the past, like, let's say 20 years?
So that's a really interesting subject because I think right now we are in the middle of a very significant transformation in terms of how we operate in space.
Sure.
If you go back since the Soviet Union launched Yuri Gagarin into space, making him the first person to leave the planet, almost all of the historic milestones and major achievements that we've seen in space, whether it's on the X-15 program, Project Mercury, Project Gemini, the Apollo moon landings, or designing, developing, and living and working on board the International Space Station, it was the government that was responsible for planning, developing, and carrying out those programs. And going forward, that is not necessarily going to be the case. So, talking about commercial space in particular, it really got its start, I think, from the Ansari XPRIZE. And for those who are not familiar with how that occurred, there was a man named Peter Diamandis who was sitting around and talking with some of his colleagues who were all space enthusiasts, and they were reflecting on how aviation had developed over the years. And what they recognized was after Charles Lindbergh had won the $25,000 Orteig Prize for being the first person to fly the Atlantic, the number of airplanes, the number of pilots, the number of people who flew in an airplane just increased tremendously. So they thought, what we need to do is have a prize for something space related and see how that works. So they came up with this idea for the $10 million X Prize that would go to the first non-government team that could design, build, and then demonstrate a vehicle capable of taking 3 people up to 100-kilometer altitude, come back and land successfully, and then do the same thing again with the same vehicle within 2 weeks. And when that prize was announced, there was just a lot of interest all over the world. There were like 26 different teams from 7 different countries that registered for the prize. But in the end, it was the team led by Burt Rutan from a company called Scaled Composites out in Mojave at the spaceport there in California. And they had this very strange looking contraption with a carrier aircraft called White Knight and a spaceship called Spaceship One. And then in September and October of 2004, they took off from Mojave's runway, climbed up to 40,000 feet or so, released the spaceship, lit the rocket engine, and zoomed up to 100-kilometer altitude, came back and landed on the runway, and did that same thing again in less than 2 weeks. So they won the $10 million prize. And after the prize was won, they took the Spaceship One and they hung it in the Milestones of Flight gallery in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum right next to Charles Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis and the Bell X-1 that was the first plane that Chuck Yeager flew when he broke the sound barrier. Why was that? Because this was such a big deal. The recognition that it doesn't necessarily take a government anymore with thousands of people and billions of dollars to build a spaceship. And so that was a real aha moment for the whole industry. And it took a little while before people could figure out a good business plan and a good design. But we're starting to see that now with all the companies that are going after that market. But a really exciting development over these last 20 years.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of development in the next decades and so on. So, do you believe that we'll see regular commercial human spaceflight within like 20 years or so?
Absolutely, yes. So again, I've had a chance to experience that myself, and it was just
Mhm.
amazing. It is a life-changing experience, and after completing that, I dedicated myself to figure out what I can do to allow more people to have that experience because it's just incredible. So we're going to need more companies, more rockets, more spaceports, and we're going to need to make them safer and more affordable and have more capacity so that more people can have that experience. But I think we're going to see more people doing so-called space tourism. We're going to see multiple commercial space stations replacing the International Space Station when it is retired. And then something that I'm very excited about that I think will be a huge enabler is point-to-point transportation through space. So what we're talking about is having a vehicle that can take off from one point on the Earth and then flying to the opposite side of the planet in just an hour or two. And that sounds crazy, but the technology is just about there. And there are a number of companies that are working on that. And one simple example, if you will, is the Starship that SpaceX has developed. Of course, that was intended to be the way to send people to Mars or to be part of the Artemis program to take NASA astronauts down to the surface of the moon and back. But that same vehicle will have the ability to do point-to-point transportation to basically any point in the Earth in less than an hour, in most places in less than a half an hour. And you can carry, because it's such a big vehicle, 100 tons of cargo or a couple of hundred people on one launch. Think of how that's going to change things. So
Mhm.
that's a big rocket. It's loud. You can't fly from everywhere. But there are other companies that are looking at other vehicles, a little smaller, some vertical takeoff and landing, some horizontal takeoff and landing. And I think that's really going to enable a lot more people to see what that type of experience is like, as well as sort of shrinking the planet. Getting ready to head off to Sydney, Australia at the end of the month. And
Oh,
I'm
wow.
not looking forward to the very long plane ride, but to think I could get there in a couple of hours in just, say, the next 10 years, that is very exciting.
Yeah, so the next couple of years are definitely going to require a lot of collaboration between companies. So what do you personally think is the most effective model for future collaboration between like NASA, the FAA, and also companies like SpaceX?
It's taken a while, but I think people are starting to see the vision now that the collaboration is the key,
Of
and
course.
we're going to need well-defined roles and responsibilities to all work together on this. Again, it used to be that the government thought, well, space is so complicated, it's so dangerous, and it's so expensive that only the government can do it. Well, I
Hmm.
think we're seeing that that's not necessarily the case anymore. And similarly, the FAA, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, is a regulator, and so they are overseeing industry in their activities, whether that's for Blue Origin or Virgin Galactic or SpaceX. All of those launches that are being conducted now are licensed by the FAA. And NASA has a huge opportunity to inspire the world and to bring good people together and think about a great vision for the country and for humanity in terms of what we want to do together in space. So between that and then the companies that are recognizing that they can contribute to this too, whether it's lowering the cost or figuring out where you can make money. It's not just exploration. It's not just carrying out national policy. It's like, hey, I could run a business that is doing this part of the industry. And so by working together, some very exciting things can happen.
So how important is space policy going to be over the next couple of years, especially with all this new technologies that we're trying to invest in?
Policy is very important. So let me just take a quick tangent from your question there. I think one of the shortcomings that we've had in aerospace over the years is we haven't done a very good job of explaining that if we're going to be very successful in this endeavor, it's going to take all kinds of people. It's not just rocket scientists, right? We're going to need lawyers, we're going to need policy experts, we're going to need technicians and welders and cooks and artists and all those kinds of people. Basically, any job you can think of that happens here on Earth, we're going to need those folks on a space station or on the moon or other places. And so we need to have a team come together. So enabling that through the appropriate national and international policies and laws and regulations will be very important. And that includes roles and responsibilities. It also includes how we do regulations. Again, in the old days, there was a tendency to learn from problems. A rocket blows up. Oh, what happened? Okay, well, let's have a regulation that says you can't do that anymore. But then we ended up with hundreds of pages of requirements that made it very difficult for people to try to succeed in this industry. And at the same time, frankly, some of our biggest tragedies have been when the government was responsible, right? The Space Shuttle Challenger in Columbia and so forth. And so we need to be open to new ways of doing business and advanced technologies, recognizing that we're going to need some of that if we want the safety record to improve. If we think, well, we got this figured out, let's just write down a bunch of rules that says everybody has to do it this way. If we had done that and said, well, you got to build a space shuttle if you want to go to space, that might not have been the right direction to head. And so being more performance-based regulations. Don't tell people exactly how to do something. Just say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. And then you can use your creativity, your imagination, your expertise to come up with better, cheaper, and safer ways to get to space.
Okay, so now for our younger generation, what mindsets or skills do you believe would be the most important for all of us, my community, my age kind of people, to develop right now?
So as I mentioned, it's going to take all different kinds of skills. So it's not just science and engineering, although that's very important. But you're going to have to learn how to work well in a team because one person can't do the whole thing. So whether you aspire to be a leader or a manager, whether you would like to focus in on the design of these systems or working in mission control on conducting the operations or raising the funds or making sure that you're complying with regulations or working on how to partner with suppliers and customers, all those different kinds of things. It's going to require that you can work well as part of a team and catch the vision for what your particular task is.
So is there a specific mindset though? Like, should we should we kind of enforce in our community that we need to turn towards space? Or, I mean, because I know it's a lot of people, but is there a certain mindset that's going to help us develop the best over the next 20 years?
Well, the nice thing is that space is pretty exciting. We don't have to really sell most people on the fact that this is an adventure. And as we get to the point where more and more people can contribute to that or participate in that, I think that's absolutely going to help us. But at the same time, being able to tell our story is tremendously important.
Yeah.
So what are we trying to do? Why does that matter? Why does the space matter today? In terms of national security, yes, technological leadership, economic competitiveness, answering the questions we have in our scientific curiosity, or inspiring the next generation, because we're going to need you all to be part of the aerospace workforce. So we need to tell that story. We need to help people understand that if they're excited by or interested in space, there's a place for you, and you just need to find the right place. And welcome to the team, and let's all do this together.